many people have played sports as an amateur? Just go out, pick up basketball, hockey, Canadians, yeah? How about taking in community theater or any kind of artistic event that's put on by amateurs, right? So to me, there's a very interesting dynamic when you have these, what I'll call amateur hours, right? There's a whole different dynamic than when you know that you're at this sort of polished, professional kind of event where everything is going to be theoretically perfectly staged and the lights will come on at exactly the right time and the players will be announced at exactly the right moment and all their moves will be perfectly choreographed. There's a certain drama, a certain unexpected quality to handing that over to a group of people in the community who may not have the same polish, who may not have the same training, who may not have the same credentials, but are bringing to it that extra bit of passion. If you've ever played pickup basketball or pickup rugby, perhaps, to notice my rugby friend in the back, you know, there's a lot of heart in there, you know? You're not playing for anything other than the pride of, you know, who's going to win the game and who gets to boast about it at drinks afterwards. And with community theater, you know, you're not going up for the Tonys, but you're really investing yourself into it. You may be volunteering after all. So there's a certain investment in it that sometimes the audience can reflect on, can feel. And so as we think about the possibility of involving what I'm calling amateurs or members of the public in actually doing the work that we all do, I think some of that same potential has the ability to be unlocked. This idea that, sure, if we all as well-trained professionals come in and convene a conversation, people should expect high-quality presentations where everybody feels safe and everybody feels included and so on. But if community members get in the mix, particularly if a community member is facilitating in his or her own community, so they look and sound and talk like the people in that conversation, as opposed to a professional who may be dropped in from another part of town or another city or another state or another country who may or may not speak that way, I think the power in that can be enormous. So what we're starting to see around the country and perhaps around the continent are examples in which some of that responsibility of convening the conversation is getting seeded or shared with the public. And the results, I think, are quite striking. So obviously, we can design what a process looks like, but it's often really helpful, and I think our core values speak to this, for those processes to be designed with the public's input into the design. People look at me totally crosswise when I say this. I'd like your input on how we're going to get input. But it's true. I mean, if I host a meeting that no one's that excited about, why, you know, what's the point? So if I design not just an in-person meeting, but an online space or a televised meeting or what have you with that public input, the results can be so much more profound. We can certainly facilitate the community conversations, but we can also train community members to be facilitators. And then we create an interface, a connection between the public and the agency we're working for through someone they may know personally, if not relate to more effectively. So that attorney at your office that's hosting a brown bag lunch in the office, but it's a conversation about community affairs. Or the clergyman that's going to convene a conversation at church or at synagogue or at the mosque, who you can relate to. You see him or her every week, but they're having a conversation that's aimed at a community purpose. So we can certainly host the event at City Hall or at the town library or what have you, but we can also use the public's own spaces, the spaces that they're already comfortable in, to convene the conversations themselves. Because what may feel safe to us, City Hall, maybe there's security there, maybe there's underground parking or something, may or may not feel safe and secure to people in the community. So they can use their own spaces. They can make the spaces that they feel welcome in, welcome and a part of the processes that we're trying to convene. So there's a role for them there. And we can certainly publicize events, but you heard Mayor Becker say this morning, our traditional methods of publicizing events, whether it be traditional media or social media, they're not obsolete, but they're starting to get that way. It's a little bit more difficult these days to get people's attention as a government agency or as a group trying to convene a conversation. We don't have the resources. Let's face it. We're not Coca-Cola. We're not Nike. We don't have enough resources to saturate a market with our messages. But if we involve the community in helping us get out those messages, then they send the message to their lists, to their community groups, and someone is much more likely to trust a message coming from a member of one of those groups than they might be from City of Austin, official notice, oh my God, I forgot to pay my electric bill. It's a totally different receipt of that conversation. And we can obviously share with the public what we gleaned from the conversation, but so can the public themselves. So whether it's as a task force or an advisory board or some sort of group of ambassadors that's part of a process, that's members of the community, leaders in different parts of the community, leaders within different interests, if they deliver the message that this public participation mattered, I think that resonates completely differently than if the mayor or the staff person does, because I think that if someone hears it from someone they already trust, that makes a big difference. So as you can see, these are at least 5 different roles for the public to play in public participation beyond just participating. So it's a really expansive look at the way the public can be involved. Now, some of the models that I'm going to talk about are at this conference. So it doesn't do me much good to spend much time telling you about them. You should go meet that guy who's at the conference. He was in my last session. His name is Jim Nukas, and he developed a concept called Portsmouth Listens, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where it's based. He's since grown it to New Hampshire Listens. And the concept is very simple. Intimate conversations in which a trained citizen is there facilitating the conversation. And the interesting thing in the way he does it is they take a particular issue where they know they need to reach some community consensus, and they will meet for, say, 4 consecutive weeks or every other week for 4 times or something in a concentrated period of time to really get some depth around that conversation. So you're not just having like a one-off living room chat, you're actually staying with the same group on a consistent basis over a month or a couple of months so that they can work through the issue and get to their own place of consensus. And then he set up a partnership with the local newspaper in which they've agreed to publish all of the individual, I say all, at least a summary of, if not all, of the individual group discussions that these citizen facilitators facilitate. So in other words, you're not just getting this sort of tacit blessing of the city to say, oh, we'd love your help, thank you so much for your service. No, we're going to be accountable by letting your work be on public display. We're going to be totally transparent, so that if an elected official then proposes something that circumvents all of that public input, it's right there in black and white in the paper. So it's a truly remarkable interweaving of different community organizations, most of which aren't part of the government. Portsmouth Listens is an independent organization, it's not governmental, but they have the support of the governmental entity there, and they have a partnership with the paper so that their work really lives beyond just whatever that city might be able to do. And individual citizens are bringing their own friends and neighbors into these conversations that feel safe, that feel inviting, that feel welcoming, that aren't as intimidating as some of the larger events that we do, even when we try to break into small groups. When someone comes into these large events, that's not always the best fit for them. And so if we have citizens that are in a position to make this kind of commitment to host a series of conversations in comfortable spaces, that can be a really significant initiative. And I should also say that this presents an opportunity to lots of people who are looking for ways to give back and don't really know how. There are people who think intrinsically, I should be serving the community, giving something back to the community, and they don't know how. And this field affords them that opportunity. If we figure out how, and this is one example of doing it, we truly can enable people with that sort of spirit, with that desire to give back to the community, to give back in this way, leveraging a set of skills that not everybody has, that doesn't come naturally to everyone, but that can be leveraged in a really profound way for a community. Now, another of my case studies is sitting in the front row. John Beatty is here from the Countywide Community Forums in Seattle. He was recognized as a finalist in a previous Core Value Award competition. And you can see on the screen all of the different ways that his particular initiative in Seattle helps to involve ordinary citizens in community conversations affecting that enormous metropolitan area. And here's another point that I should make. In a city like Seattle, a city like Austin, even a city like Salt Lake City, we as an organization, as a city or as a convening entity, we don't have enough capacity just within our organization to reach the entire community we're trying to serve. We don't. I have 2 staff people. Most people have no more than 5 or 6. And we're trying to reach a metro area of, 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million people. So of necessity, we need other people involved. We need an army, if you will. We need a core of people who are willing to step up and assist with the conversation if we are truly going to meet the core values of public participation that call for those affected by a decision to be able to affect that decision. That's not possible if you don't involve other people. So in John's case, and certainly John, after we're finished, should share more, registers these folks called citizen counselors. So I like the fact that it even plays on the sort of city council concept to empower the people that are serving in this capacity to really be leaders, not just facilitators, not just volunteers, but leaders to help manage conversations, to connect with guests that may be in their area or may be of similar mind that want to be part of their conversation, and be part of a chat that will actually inform policy, like the example in New Hampshire. So it's not just talking for the sake of talking. It really has significance to the policy-making process. And again, John can talk more after I'm through. Another model that we're starting to see that we've been using in Austin is the concept of meeting in a box. So this is the case where you simply take what was going to take place at the larger community event and package it in a form that someone can, check it out or get and host in their own environment. So for instance, with our Imagine Austin master planning, comprehensive planning process, we didn't think we could capture the entire city's cross-section just from 4 community workshops all across town. So what we said was, look, community leader, here's a facilitator guide, here's a participant guide, here's a big piece of paper where you can record people's comments, and here's the way to turn back the input. Have the meeting whenever you like within this month or 2-month period, and send us the input back. Because the truth is, people in our communities are super involved in community organizations. They go to lots of meetings. So to ask them to go to another meeting for the city or for the state or for the county is actually asking quite a lot, even for super citizens. And so what makes sense is to leverage the existing social capital. We already have people investing in these other community groups, Kiwanis, Rotary, Church, Boy Scouts, you name it, and leverage that for the benefit of the community as a whole. Because people already are self-selecting to enter those environments, to be safe, to contribute to the community in that way. Why not leverage it on behalf of the city or the community? And so this is helpful with convenience, it's helpful with flexibility, it can happen whenever you like. People may feel safer if they're in a group of people that they have something in common with. Even though we'd like to have heterogeneity in our groups, sometimes it's okay to have a group of like-minded people at least be part of the early part of the conversation, which in turn may make them feel more at liberty to share their opinion more honestly than they would if they're in a group of people they don't know as well. Then there's the project known as Project Civil Discourse. There's quite a bit of text here, but what I love about this work in Arizona is the pledge. And this is tied into our keynote speaker, Carolyn Lucasmeyer, who's with the National Institute for Civil Discourse. I pledge to engage in the basic principles of civil discourse, to respect diverse points of view, listen with an open mind, and speak with integrity. I call upon all civic leaders to meet the challenge of solving difficult social issues by adhering to these principles, thereby creating a better world for ourselves and future generations. And so they utilize the National Issues Forum model, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with, where part of the time is spent gleaning expertise from experts on a particular topic, and then the other part of it is in small roundtable discussions. So it's nothing too scientific, but the neat thing is how much citizens get to be a part of actually facilitating the dialogue. It's not strictly something hosted by government. It's an external partnership. And then a project that we're developing in Austin is known as Conversation Corps. So it's quite a simple concept, and it's modeled after what's happening in New Hampshire and Seattle and Arizona and elsewhere. You're really trying to empower and engage the unengaged and disempowered. We all know this intrinsically, but there are so many obstacles to people participating that most of us don't even process. Childcare, language services, transportation, the knowledge base sometimes needed to understand why we're even talking about this and why it's going to affect my life. So there are all these ways that people check out because they just don't understand how they can participate given those barriers and what to do. So part of the concept behind Conversation Corps is to enable people who think that this is not for them to see a conversation pop up in their neighborhood with someone they know and say, oh, I didn't realize that someone I knew and cares about these issues, so I'm going to care about it in turn. And so, again, it involves training community facilitators who go across the city with the goal eventually that we will have a conversation center within about a mile of where everybody lives in Austin. Because it is so difficult to get around Austin these days that if we were any further away, we might disincentivize participation just on that basis. And we use the time in a couple of different ways. We pose sort of a topic of the month that we're particularly interested in talking with the public on, and we spend some of the time talking about that specific topic with a facilitator guide and a participant guide. But we also, to Nan's point, open the conversation up to hear what's on the minds of the people in that community and have it not just be on the basis of what are the problems in this part of town, but what are the assets, what are the things that other community members can bring to a particular issue that they didn't necessarily equate with a city problem or something that the city might have some involvement in, so that the output of this isn't just input for the city or something the city needs to go work on, but some sort of community partnership, leveraging the kind of grants that Mayor Becker talked about for neighborhoods to get to work on a project on their own, as opposed to waiting for government to come along and fix it. So it's not just a way for citizens to talk back to the government, it's a way for citizens to talk to each other and figure out ways in which they can work together to solve a community issue, perhaps with government's help, but perhaps on their own. But of course, critical to this is a feedback loop, that the facilitators take the input back to the government or agency, hopefully online in most cases, with an added link to a 311 or other telephone-related hotline so that someone without online access can still access the process. And they see the input on the screen, and they see what they said, and then they get feedback from the agency on what was done with their specific piece of input. So it's not just a conversation, it's not just a chat, it's an opportunity for people to share the way they think the government and the community should address an issue, and then a chance for them to see the response that was made to that particular issue. So to my mind, there are a number of different keys for success in these kinds of endeavors. You need facilitator diversity. You need the facilitator base to look like your community, not just look like the folks that have the disposable time and high education and so on that we often find in facilitators, but a really diverse pool of people who also will spread out across the community and perhaps meet at different times of day. Business people may want to meet over breakfast on their way to work or at the lunch hour. Community folks may want to meet on the weekends. Facilitator training that is extremely accessible. In other words, we're not talking about a 5-day course. We're not even necessarily talking about a costly course. We're talking about a course that can be easily completed by that facilitator to where they then feel prepared to go out into the community and do this kind of work. And we all know that the work we've done to become facilitators is very complex and sophisticated. So it's not easy to create modules that really meet the community's needs, but I do think that that's essential, to give them the very basics that they need to be successful. The easy user-friendly guides. You can't expect just giving them a topic that they're going to know how to handle it. They need to have an easy-to-understand guide. They need an easy user-friendly way to record their input. They need to be given some tender loving care as the process goes along, because this might be messy even for them. And they need clarity amongst the organization staff about how this is actually all going to go. When we get the input, what are we going to do with it? That's something the staff has to establish from the get-go. Thank you all very much.